Welcome to The Deep Dive. We take your sources, dig in, and we pull out the key nuggets of knowledge for you. Today, we're looking at a press conference transcript. It's from Israel's top leadership, and it gives this rare, direct view into their strategic thinking. We're talking about the ongoing conflict, their long-term goals, the big challenges they're facing right now. Our mission here is to really unpack all of this so you get a solid understanding of this very high-stakes moment straight from their perspective.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, is just how direct the statements are. It's quite blunt. It gives you a real window into how they see the situation. So we'll focus on those key decisions, the military posture, the diplomatic hurdles, and the regional impact they're claiming.
Okay, let's dive right in then. The source talks about a really significant cabinet, a strategic shift. What exactly was it? What does it tell us about where things...
Right, so after the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, took control of roughly 70% of the Gaza Strip. They called it Operation Gideon's Chariots. The cabinet decided to shift gears. They're moving to what they term the phase of defeat.
The phase of defeat. Okay.
And this means instructing the IDF to go after the last Hamas stronghold, specifically Gaza City. The source calls it the capital of terror, the center of Hamas's power, their headquarters, commanders, infrastructure, all of that.
So moving into this phase, what does the source say about the end game? What are the main principles guiding how they want to conclude this conflict?
Well, the cabinet laid out 5 key principles according to this transcript. First, dismantling Hamas, and that means eliminating them both militarily and as the governing power there.
Okay. Number 1.
Second, the return of all hostages. They emphasize both the living and, sadly, the...
Got it.
Third, demilitarization of the Strip. So stopping any more weapons being made or smuggled into Gaza.
Makes sense.
Fourth is maintaining Israeli security control, basically overarching security authority in Gaza.
Right.
And fifth, establishing an alternative civilian government. And they're very clear on this. It cannot be Hamas and it cannot be the Palestinian Authority. It has to be an administration that, as they put it, doesn't educate for terror, finance terror, or instigate terror, but wants to live peacefully alongside Israel.
That's a very specific list. 5 points for their envisioned ends.
Now, with the focus shifting to these last strongholds, what's the plan for civilians still in those areas? How are they addressing that?
The transcript says the IDF intends to enable civilians to evacuate the combat. They compare it to what they say was done successfully in places like Khan Yunis, Rafah, Deir al-Balah. So providing organized, safe exit routes, humanitarian aid too, but outside fighting.
Okay, so we've got the military objectives, but then the document really shifts to the hostage, which is just incredibly difficult. From this leadership's perspective, why hasn't a deal happened after all these months? Yeah, the assessment given in the press conference is, quite simply, that Hamas isn't willing to make a deal. They say Hamas put forward impossible conditions the leadership sees as basically surrender conditions that no responsible government would accept.
What kind of conditions are we talking about?
Well, things like a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, including the Philadelphia axis, that's that border strip with Egypt. From Israel's perspective, that would just allow weapons to flow freely back in.
Right.
Also, demands for releasing prisoners the leadership calls monsters, terrorists, with, quote, blood on their hands. And significantly, binding international guarantees that would stop the IDF from resuming military operations later on.
So, if negotiations are seen as a dead end from this side, what's the strategy now for getting the Hamas back? Is there another way presented?
The belief stated very clearly in the source is that defeating Hamas militarily is the only path left to get the hostages returned. That's the argument. They apparently consider just sort of standing in place, maybe doing limited raids, but the vast majority of the cabinet felt that wouldn't work. It wouldn't achieve the defeat of Hamas or the return of the hostages, in their view.
How does this compare to earlier in the conflict? Has the thinking on hostage retrieval changed?
It seems so. The source actually points out that early on, a senior security figure apparently doubted any living hostages would come back.
Wow.
But they argue that by pursuing this military pressure route, they have seen results. They claim 205 out of 255 hostages are back, 148 of them alive. The commitment stated now is to get all the remaining ones, currently estimated at 20 living and 30 deceased, back as well.
This source goes beyond just Gaza, doesn't it? It talks about a much wider regional picture. What's this historic juncture they describe?
Yes. They frame this whole period as a truly historic juncture. They connect it back to a vow made right after the attack on October 8th to essentially change the face of the Middle East. And they're arguing that this is actively happening now. It's presented as a really profound, lasting regional shift.
What specific regional changes or achievements are they claiming as part of this bigger strategy?
They claim the Iranian axis has been broken, and they give examples. In Lebanon, they say Hezbollah has been hit hard, and there's supposedly a new government working to disarm it. In Syria, they claim the Assad regime effectively fell, pointing to Israel seizing the Hermon summit and working to demilitarize the border area, specifically mentioning protecting the Druze community there.
Okay.
And then there's Iran itself. The leadership claims they've managed two huge threats, Iran's nuclear program and their ballistic missiles, pushing them back by many years. They call this a historic achievement.
And they claim all this happened despite facing a lot of pressure.
A huge amount, yes. The source really emphasizes that these actions, particularly going into Rafah, happened despite massive international and internal pressure to stop the war. The argument is, basically, if they had yielded to that pressure, figures like Sinwar in Gaza, Nasrallah in Lebanon, Assad in Syria, and Iran's weapons programs would have remained unchecked. And that, from their viewpoint, would be an ongoing existential.
Okay, so bringing it back from the wider region to Gaza itself, what's the current situation on the ground there, according to this source, and what exactly do they mean by complete victory?
Well, in Gaza, they claim significant gain, control over most of the territory, eliminating many Hamas commanders and fighters, destroying rocket production and launch sites. Hamas, they say, is now cornered in just 2 final strongholds.
But not total victory yet.
No, the transcript is very clear. Victory is not yet complete. Getting rid of Hamas entirely is presented as absolutely essential for Israel's security and future. The argument is you can't leave the perpetrators of October 7th in place right next door to Israeli community. It's framed almost as a contest of Israel's determination versus the enemy's goal to destroy Israel. A willpower test, they call it.
The source also touches on the human side, messages from soldiers, citizens. What did it say there?
It does. The PM mentions being impressed by the bravery, reading a note from a reservist's wife. Her husband's battalion, the 1920, is apparently very determined, strong, motivated. He also quotes a Golani officer who tragically lost both legs in Gaza.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, saying things like, go all the way. You can't leave these monsters there. And if I could, I'd go back to fight. Continue until the end, until victory. It adds this very personal, very resolute dimension as presented by the PM.
That certainly brings us to the challenges leadership face. Not just military, but internal dissent, public opinion, difficult domestic. How does the PM in this transcript address criticism about strategy or things like the Haredi draft?
Right. It tackles several tough questions head on. Regarding pressure to maybe stop early or do partial operations, the PM insists they're managing the war with wisdom. The aim is defeating Hamas and freeing hostages, not stopping for halfway deals. He mentions a specific 12-day operation followed 6 months of intense prep work.
Okay. And the Haredi enlistment issue, that's huge internally.
Yes. On that, the source says efforts are underway to enlist thousands of Haredim, calling it an unprecedented number for Israel. But it also adds that this process takes time and there have been political delays. It does also mention Haredi combat units exist and that some Haredi soldiers have fallen.
What about Rafah? There were questions about timelines, right? Claims it would end the war quickly.
He addresses that. When questioned, the PM pivots slightly, claiming that colossal achievements, these regional ones in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, have happened since the Rafah operation began, suggesting, that significant things were still actively happening on other fronts during that period.
And disagreements with the military leadership, that often comes up.
It does. The transcript acknowledges respect for the IDF, but stresses that the ultimate basic decisions come from the political level, the PM and the cabinet. Examples are given where the PM apparently took a different stance than senior military or security figures.
Like what?
Things like how many reservists to call up on day one, the decision not to immediately open a second front with Hezbollah in Lebanon, going into Rafah and the Philadelphia Axis despite U.S. objection, and certain operations done without a clear green light from allies.
Right.
The principle stated is, we are a nation with an army, not an army with a nation. But the PM also confirms full backing for the chief of staff to carry out the cabinet's decision.
Then there's the humanitarian situation. Accusations of a starvation. How is that addressed?
It's vehemently denied. The source says there's absolutely no such policy. It explains an earlier pause in aid was because Hamas was allegedly looting it and using it for recruitment. The argument is Hamas's actions caused shortages, not Israeli policy.
Okay.
Now, they say Israel is working to bypass Hamas, increasing aid entry points, securing distribution routes, doing airdrops. The source makes the point that if there was a starvation policy, 2 million Dizans wouldn't still be alive. It's quite critical of international media for pushing what it calls false narratives and of European leaders for not countering them.
And public diplomacy, the information war.
Yeah, they acknowledge shortcomings there, blaming some outdated bureaucratic systems. But they also highlight efforts by the foreign ministry and the IDF spokesperson to fight back against false propaganda. They mention the huge challenge of the digital age, especially bots and hostile funding trying to shape opinion. The need to adapt to this digital reality is emphasized.
One last point, they covered Iran's nuclear program. What was the claim?
The claim is that Israel's actions have set back Iran's nuclear program by many years, moving them from being maybe months away from a weapon or a facility. But it comes with a warning. This requires full vigilance and readiness for any scenario.
Wow, that was very thorough. We've covered military strategy, complex international relations, the huge personal stakes involved. You should now have a much clearer picture of the strategic lands, at least as presented in this.
Absolutely. And it really underscores how leaders in these situations are constantly juggling immediate tactical needs with these very broad, long-term strategic aims, making tough calls under intense pressure and, constantly trying to manage the information space too.
So as you process all this, what's something to really think about?
Well, this deep dive really pushes the claim that profound changes are already happening in the Middle East. So consider this. If these strategic shifts they describe actually play out as they claim, how might that fundamentally change the power dynamics in the region for years, maybe decades? And what kind of knock-on effects, good or bad, intended or unintended, could we see for the wider international community? That's something to chew on.